Welcome to another edition of the Good Eye Podcast. My name's Jay Smack, and today my guest is filmmaker, biologist, conservationist Laurie Hedges. Laurie is based in Stockholm, Sweden, and we met working on a project together. In part of my other life, I am a voiceover artist and audio engineer, and I voiced a narration project for Laurie while he was working on a new film. So that's how we met, and he's just seemed like a fascinating guy doing really good work, really important work. So I invited him on the podcast to have a conversation, and you will hear the results momentarily. So please sit back and relax, and hopefully you'll find something of value. Here's my conversation with independent filmmaker and conservationist Laurie Hedges on today's Good Eye Podcast. All right, and Laurie Hedges, welcome to the Good Eye Podcast, man. I'm speaking to you from currently cold and wet Richmond, Virginia. Are you in Stockholm?
I am, yes. It is cold, misty, and there is still some snow on the ground.
What took you to Sweden? Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from the UK. I have a really odd accent, so normally people guess from all over the place before they mention that. But I have a girlfriend who is from here, and so it's kind of the typical answer, really. She lives here, and I moved over sort of last year.
That's really cool. I actually have quite a bit of Swedish in my background. I think it was my great grandfather, maybe one generation before that, actually was named, or one side of the family was Johansson, and the other side of the family was Olaf's Tapir, which is named for Olaf's daughter and Johann's son. So
okay, cool. Well, she's a bit of a curveball because she's originally from Uganda, so she's got no kind of Swedish names, nothing. So yeah.
That's cool. You guys are from all over. Well, exactly. I appreciate you taking a few minutes today. We met based on a project we both worked on together, me as a voice talent, you as a producer, and I was just fascinated with your work. I was taken with your work, which I should say off the bat, if people want to check it out, it's Laurie Hedges. That's LaurieHedges.com. And there's a bunch of your work on there. You're a filmmaker, you're a conservationist. I didn't realize you're also a biologist, correct?
Yeah. I was a biologist first.
Biologist first. We all have something else that we came to our passion through, I guess. But I wanted to talk about the conservation and the filmmaking. The filmmaking is close to my heart as an audio guy and a voiceover guy and a musician. But of course, the conservation is what spoke to me as well. You have a number of causes that you work on. You seem to have some that you really like to focus on. Could you take us through a little bit of your background, how you ended up being a filmmaker and conservationist, and then eventually I want to talk about how you got involved with advocacy on behalf of Baird's tapir, which is an interesting animal. But first of all, how'd you get into filmmaking and conservation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess conservation I've always been into ever since I was a kid, you know. I'm not entirely sure what grabbed me first, but, you know, I just know ever since I was a kid, animals have always been my thing. Growing up, I could just sit and look at birds for hours, you know, and I remember my mum getting really frustrated because she wanted me to go somewhere. And, you know, she was trying to pull me away from watching the birds, and all I wanted to do was just sit and watch them. But yeah, so I guess my career really started after I graduated university. I took a one-way ticket out to Southeast Asia, and spent the next 3 years or so working on the conservation of large mammals. More broadly speaking, the conservation of the rainforest, using large mammals as a vehicle to do that. So I spent a good few years I guess doing population monitoring of typically large carnivores. So a big focus was on tigers, but I also did a research program on melanistic leopards, better known as black panthers in Malaysia. And yeah, so I was out in the forest a lot, for weeks, months at a time. And obviously, one of the big threats facing wildlife out there is poaching. There's a very sophisticated and well-run animal trafficking network that involves poachers going out into the forests for months at a time. They're looking for many things, different species of tree, plants to harvest, but they're setting snares and catching wildlife to be shipped normally to China, but also to Vietnam as well as other places. So we were running into a lot of poachers out in the forest, and we wanted to do something about it. So one day my boss just hands me a little point and shoot camera and just says, try and do something, we need to engage the public here in Malaysia. So that's where I was working, and donors, and sort of, he found he was going into meetings with sort of state government officials, giving them lots of facts, lots of data. But he found when it came to visual imagery of poachers in the forest with snares or animals that have been snared, that's when people sort of stood up and paid attention. So I just started out by taking little videos here and there. I even managed to take videos of the poachers themselves. Sometimes they'd just be curious about me, like, what are you doing out here?
The poachers?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because it strikes me as extremely dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, they, actually, in a weird sort of way, I had a lot of admiration for them. It was they are not from Malaysia normally. They come from places like Vietnam or Cambodia, and they're shipped into Malaysia and sent out into the forest for can be 2 months with nothing more than a sack of rice and some snares, and told, feed yourselves, water yourselves, and we'll pick you up in 2 months' time. And sometimes I'm not even sure if they were aware that what they were doing was as illegal as it is. So, as heartbreaking as it is that, they are causing the massive declines in wildlife species on a personal level, it was kind of hard to, get over the fact that they're living a very brutal existence for not much pay. So when I ran into them, it would actually normally, more often than not, be a case of either them just wanting to avoid me, they don't want any trouble, or just curiosity. They would sort of, what are you doing out here? Language barrier was sometimes difficult because I spoke Malay or English, and very often they only spoke Cambodian or Vietnamese, or a bit of Chinese. So the interactions were, interesting to say the least.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, I just had no idea, because you have these impressions that poachers are evil people who are scurrying around in the shadows and avoiding the law. It sounds a lot like human trafficking, like maybe they had no other, and I'm not saying all of them, but based on your experiences, that maybe they had no other place to turn for gainful employment, and they've got families to feed, and there was opportunity, and people drop them off. I mean, dropping them off with a bag of rice. It sounds like the kids you run into in urban areas who are given a clipboard and told to, go around and accept donations for mysterious made up causes. I really hadn't thought about it like that, but because you think of the poachers, like I said, as, an evil population of people out for nothing but, to profit off elephant ivory, which they are essentially, but that's an interesting perspective. So you sort of had some on-the-job training, and like you've said a number of times, you were a biologist first and a conservationist, became a filmmaker. So you've got all this footage. What was next? You had to learn how to run software and things of that nature?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, just again, my boss just told me go on YouTube, learn how to do this, and give me a film in 2 weeks or something. So that's what I did. I just taught myself how to stitch clips together. Put some text over the top, some music, and then yeah, the results were pretty rudimentary, but they appeared to work. They really grabbed people's attention, and there was a case where my boss went into a meeting with a very high up individual who, it came out of it with a really positive outcome. He said it was when he saw the images of people in the forest with the animals that he, knew were special to the country, and he could visualize the problem. That's when he was like, okay, we need to actually do something about this.
Yeah, the visual aspect, as everybody knows these days, especially online, videos and pictures and things that you can actually relate to get people involved. And it reminds me of some of the children's causes, children in developing nations. Once people see the kids actually suffering is when they get in and get involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and we would do our best to try and tell stories. One early example was we had a tiger. We used to recognize tigers by their individual stripe patterns, and so we were able to follow them after we had sort of captured images with remote operated camera traps in the forest. And there was one individual that we used to see fairly regularly, and then she disappeared for about 12 months, and when she reappeared she had lost a foot in a snare. So we kind of used that as an example of telling a story. We were basically again really early on rudimentary filmmaking. I just stitched together all the film, the images that we had of her, and said, oh, look, this was on this date and on this date, and then everything goes black for 12 months, and when she reappears, she's missing a foot. Oh. How did this happen? And then we showed images of poachers setting snares in the forest. You say, that's how it happened.
I know that there are some topics that you deal with and that you're working on that are a little bit sensitive. So at any point, if there's anything you can't speak to, just let me know. But you say your boss told you to get some pictures. Who is it you work directly for and work with on these causes as far as organizations?
Yeah, so back then I was working with a really awesome research group in Malaysia called Rimba. My boss was a man called Ruben Clements, who I've got utmost admiration for. But yeah, that was in my research days. Nowadays, I'm completely independent. I work with sort of anyone I want to, and so that goes from NGOs, big wildlife conservation organizations, to just individuals, and pretty much all over the globe. A lot of people in South and Central America, North America, Southeast Asia. I'm just finishing up a project on leopards all across Asia. So yeah, pretty a wide range of things.
What did you call the panthers or the black leopards earlier? Melanistic?
Yeah, melanistic. Yeah, just because they are biologically they're identical. They are just leopards. So it's just one species, but some individuals have a mutation, which means that they have a black coat. They're still leopards. They just have a uniform black color in their coat. And it's fascinating. It's a unique phenomenon that in the peninsula Malaysia and in the far south of Thailand, almost the entire population of leopards is black, and it doesn't happen anywhere else. You find melanistic leopards elsewhere, particularly in Asia, but it's always it's quite rare. It's very, very rare cases that you find them. And for some reason, in Malaysia, they constitute about 99.9% of the population. And to this date, we still don't really know why. There's several theories, but yeah, it's a unique population.
Think it's something in diet or something bigger, something genetic.
Well, yeah, it's genetic. We know it's genetic. What's the mystery is why that gene pool ended up being melanistic. One theory is that it's adaptive. That there's something about the local environment in Malaysia that the forest is particularly dark, closed canopy, and so maybe they have a selective advantage over yellow leopards because of maybe the low levels of light. So they're able to hide better. Maybe there's better competition. They're able to compete better against tigers. Yeah, but there's other theories, including, a volcano that exploded in Sumatra several thousand years ago, which would have killed off a lot of the local fauna. And perhaps it's just, coincidence that the ones that recolonized the area were melanistic. So yeah, there's different theories.
Working with big cats, especially on their behalf, have you found yourself in any dangerous situations?
Never from the cats themselves, but yeah, I've been in plenty of dangerous situations. But the cats, no,
That's interesting.
It's amazing though. Yeah, no, they could take you out in a moment's notice. But yeah, they choose not to more often than not. I've said that, and I've just realized that no, actually, there was one occasion that happened much later when, I was very much in danger from a big cat, but that wasn't the tigers. That was actually a lion.
Oh my! Well, it's interesting. I asked you the question. You said, "Oh yeah, plenty of times, but not from the cats." What are some of the other ones? Anything you can talk about?
In Malaysia, we used to. One of the hazards was elephants.
Oh my, yeah.
Yeah, they were quite dangerous out in the forest. Yeah, snakes. I almost ran into a king cobra one time, and it was just the guys that I was working with happened to spot it just in time and pulled me back. Yeah, sometimes pretty just mundane things like disease. There's dengue fever out there. It's not fun. But yeah. More recently, it's other humans is normally the most dangerous thing. I finished up shooting a film in Honduras earlier this year, right before the pandemic, and had some pretty close interactions with narcotics smugglers. Yeah,
man, that'll keep you on your toes. So how did you, I mean, I'd like to get into that more, but I don't think we can. So tell me about I don't mean to belittle it, your fascination, your interest. How did you get involved with tapirs, which for people who don't know, they should Google it. You've seen a tapir before, even if you don't know it. I'm talking to the listeners. But what drew you to them? And is this one of the things that you've been able to choose? You say you're working for yourself now and you're independent. Have you chosen tapirs as an object of your work?
Yeah, accidentally, I've got to admit, but I'm a complete convert to them now. They are just amazing on so many levels. I mean, I first got introduced to them through a good friend, Esteban Brenes Mora, who's a biologist and conservationist in Costa Rica, who I ended up working for again as a biologist for about a year. But yeah, they're a fascinating animal, and on so many levels, it makes sense to focus on them as a species for conservation. I came to realize that animals like big cats can be quite divisive in a lot of respects. Working with them as a single species to conserve areas of habitat doesn't always make sense. You can upset a lot of people because they often feel like conservationists are putting the needs of species that they perceive to be inherently beautiful or charismatic above the needs of local people, and that can often actually harm you when trying to confront the issues involved. I'm not trying to suggest that it's not a good idea to focus on big cats. It's just that they have complications involved with them. Tapirs, on the other hand, we found a really great species. Nobody really seems to get angry about tapirs. You know? They're not dangerous. They don't attack people. People don't lose their livestock to them. In terms of, you know, confrontation, there is issues. They can raid people's crops and harm their livelihoods, but you know, more often than not, local people are quite receptive to getting on board with the idea of conserving these animals, and they are biologically. There's a lot of reason to conserve them. They play a lot of roles in the ecosystem in terms of dispersing seeds of certain plants, helping to maintain a certain kind of forest structure, and recently scientists have actually they've calculated that forests with tapirs in them are much better at absorbing carbon dioxide than forests without. So even, you know, in terms of fighting climate change, they play a role. So they're just an amazing animal.
I had to look this up, so I don't want anybody to be impressed, but they are ungulates. Is that correct?
Yes.
What family is that? What is that?
So ungulates, and I'm really going to embarrass myself here.
You're the biologist. Come on, man.
I'm a recovering biologist. I describe myself as a filmmaker these days. But yeah, you know, their most close relatives are horses and rhinos. So they are part of a really ancient lineage of mammals that they've literally been around almost unchanged for I think it's 50 million years, 55 million years. You know, they popped up right after the dinosaurs disappeared. So I can't tell you the exact name of the lineage. You might have to look that one up for me. But yeah, you know, if you wanna look at an animal that was sharing landscapes with woolly mammoths, you know, then look at a tapir, because they are the direct, you know, descendants of a time when a lot of species have disappeared from that time.
I had no idea. They even look a little bit like a javelina or a wild pig, but they're actually closer related to the horse.
Yes.
What is it about them or their experience that requires advocacy on their behalf? Why are they threatened if they are? You know, you've explained what drew you to them, but why do they need our help?
Yeah, so there's 4 different species of them sort of remaining in the world today. And yeah, they've faced a variety of threats depending on where they are and which species. So you get one species in Southeast Asia called the Malayan tapir or the Asiatic tapir. And then there's 3 species in Central and South America. It's Baird's tapir, and then there's the mountain tapir, and then there's the Brazilian or lowland tapir. So yeah, so all of them face to varying degrees threats of poaching, deforestation, and then things like collisions with vehicles. You know, as they try to cross a road, you know, cars will hit them. Yeah, so in places like Southeast Asia, you know, possibly the number one threat they face there is loss of habitat. You know, the forest is being lost in Malaysia, Thailand, and in Myanmar, also known as Burma, at a astounding rate. You know, and they can't survive without it. In Central America, there's a lot of poaching. People hunt them for sport or for meat. You know. It can be out of necessity. There's a lot of poverty in these regions, and if people want meat to eat, then a tapir is a very large animal with a lot of meat on it. So yeah, there's other threats like toxins from pesticides in places like Brazil, in the grassland habitats particularly. There's a lot of pesticides used, which are really quite toxic, and they can cause problems like infertility or, you know, or just straight out death.
You mentioned a while ago how these efforts can sometimes be divisive, and the well-meaning Western community thinks sometimes that we're going to swoop in and save a species or save an animal, and that people will just love us for it. However, we go into some other people's land, and sometimes they don't see that as such a good thing. They've got business to do. They've got families to raise. They've got, vocations to pursue. What have been some of your experiences as far as the opinion of, say, local peoples when you come into an area trying to, save animals that perhaps they might see as a nuisance? You mentioned a little while ago, the tapirs being hit by cars, things like that. Do you have any insight on that, on those attitudes, those kind of opposing attitudes?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's undeniable. Humans are the reason why species is disappearing, but at the same time, humans have got to be part of the solution. If we try and preserve animals in a vacuum, it's just not going to work. We've got to consider the impacts on particularly the people living around the animals first and foremost. Partly, from a practical standpoint, conservation just doesn't work unless you involve the local people. I mean, in terms of examples, I mean, I can give you a few on tapirs. A car colliding with a tapir is an extremely dangerous thing for both parties. Unfortunately, tapirs more often than not will die, but so will people. There are a lot of cases where people die in road accidents with tapirs. So you can really frame it as a necessity to preventing road deaths by also preventing tapir deaths. I worked with somebody called Patricia Medici in Brazil who is using this argument. There's a landscape called the Cerrado grassland where there's a lot of collisions with tapirs, and she's pressuring a state government to implement fencing along a particular stretch of highway, but there's just a massive amount of collisions with tapirs, and a lot of people have died. So that's just an example where the welfare of people and wildlife can be intertwined.
It's all about balance. Yeah, it's sometimes it's tough to strike that balance, but obviously this and many other things, that can be divisive. The conversations absolutely have to be had with intellectual honesty, if we're going to get anywhere. Talking a little bit of shop, how do you choose your next project, and what is your process as far as mapping out a piece, a documentary, or a feature on a species or anything, whatever you go into? Do you storyboard it? I mean, walk us a little bit through your process when you're approaching a project.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always so unique. Every project is different. We normally start with the standpoint of what do we want this film to achieve, because we're looking at it as a tool to achieve conservation action. So it's always got to start with that, really. What do we need? Is it more funding? Is it lobbying on a particular issue, or is it raising awareness on a particular issue, engaging with certain people, communities, local communities, international communities? So depending on the application, we kind of have to work backwards from there and think, okay, how do we reach that place? Sometimes that means making more in-depth, nuanced, long-form documentary type films. Other times it's just really short, campaign films, 1 minute, 2 minutes. So I'm a bit of a one-man band that working with conservationists means you've got to be efficient, and because there's no large budgets available. So I try to just treat every project individually, and respond to the needs that are there. I think it's kind of that, really.
And I imagine, obviously, your work and your process has been affected like everyone else by COVID. How has that affected you in the last year regarding, say, travel or plans you're able to or not able to make?
Yeah, well, I got caught out by the pandemic, and I was actually on a shoot in Honduras, and I got trapped there for several weeks. And yeah, since then, everything has slowed right down. There's been almost no international travel, unfortunately. So I've kind of had to adapt a bit and focused on using existing material that I've shot. Luckily, I managed to shoot a lot of footage in the beginning of 2020. And yeah, I've been editing that into new films. And yeah, and also teaching myself animation. It's all about working out how you can continue working, but from a desktop. So
No, man.
yeah, and a lot of planning. I've got projects that are ready to go as soon as we can get traveling again. It's just about a case of waiting until that's possible.
Well, I have to pick your brain a little bit about your tools. What do you work on? What kind of cameras and lenses do you like, and your software platforms? Tell us a little bit about the tech stuff.
Oh, yeah, happy to talk tech. So my main camera is a Sony A7S II, and then I have a backup, an A6300. Great, just, small mirrorless
Yeah.
cameras. I kind of run with the philosophy that I've got to be able to take all of my equipment on the back of a motorbike, because it's happened before. Shooting through the middle of literally through the middle of a forest on the back of a motorbike. So yeah, and then I normally have a drone with me, a DJI Mavic, and yeah, lenses. I try to have I have a long lens, a 200 600 zoom lens for getting wildlife. Then just a workhorse, a 24 to 70 millimeter, and then I have a wide angle, 16 to 20, 24. Yeah, and that does me pretty well. I have a gimbal as well. I use whenever I can, and then just variety of either tripods, monopods, and yeah, try and somehow get it all into a backpack.
What software do you like to work on? What video?
Yeah, so I use a combination of Final Cut,
Hmm.
just for stitching the clips together, and then Adobe After Effects for just
Oh, yeah.
making the graphics.
Yep. And you say you're learning
Yeah.
some animation now, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Trying to, it's all basic, but I love there's a you know I love a lot of the mapping films that channels like Vox do. There was a whole series called Vox Borders. That really inspired me. There's a lot of work that I do that involves, showing locations and places, and so I do a lot of mapping, creating fancy maps, and yeah.
Have you been a Sony guy very long? You said you had a couple Sony bodies, and I know that Sony has come a long way in the photography and film field. Nikon and Canon are not the only players anymore. Is that a recent thing? I'm just curious.
No, ever since I started filming, so I started in 2017 or 2016. No, ever since I started, I've been Sony, and yeah, as soon as I have my next project sort of locked in, I'm going to be dropping a bit of money on the latest A7S III.
Very
Yeah, I
cool.
mean, I can't fault them. I think they're fantastic cameras.
Yeah, a lot of people think the same way. Well, Laurie, this
Yeah.
is absolutely fascinating. I appreciate you taking a few minutes. Where can people, number one, find you, and number two, support some of the causes that you're into and fighting on behalf of?
Yeah, so I mean, you can find me on. I mean, my social media is just Instagram, really. So I'm at Hedges Laurie, and then there's also my website, which you said earlier, www.lauriehedges.com. And yeah, just reach out. I always want to hear from people about anything really. I focus on wildlife conservation, but I also do a little bit in terms of human rights, and I've worked in the Philippines a little bit before on on some projects there, human development. Reach out to me. I always want to talk with people, even if we can't work something out in terms of a job. Obviously I have to sustain myself, but I am always more than happy to advise people on how they can make films themselves, tips on just editing, getting started. Just love to hear from people.
Speaking of sustaining yourself, I saw you had a couple commercial projects on there on your website. Do you do much commercial work, or just the odd out project?
No, I don't really anymore.
Yeah.
Right in the beginning, I think I did a couple just because I needed to do anything to support myself.
Sure.
Nowadays, I'm pretty much just completely focused on wildlife. And as I said, the occasional human rights stuff.
That's great, man. That's awesome. Laurie Hedges, I appreciate you taking some time here on the Good Eye Podcast to talk a little shop and talk about some of the great work you're doing, man. I appreciate your time, but I appreciate your efforts too. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been really good.
My significant gratitude to Laurie Hedges for taking a few minutes and having a conversation on today's Good Eye Podcast. If you would like to find out more about Laurie, as he mentioned, LaurieHedges.com, LaurieHedges.com, and on Instagram at Hedges Laurie. Go check out his work, support it if you can. Hit me up if you have any questions here. That is j@jsmack.com or directly at goodeyepodcast@gmail.com. Either one comes directly to me. Always interested in your feedback, suggestions, story ideas, interview ideas. Please do share, subscribe, like the podcast, whatever you can do, and tell someone about it, because word of mouth is still the best promotion for podcasts. And if you would like to come on the show, also feel free to hit me up. And that's it. That's it for this episode. So thanks very much for your time, attention, and intention. And till next time, try to look at life with your good eye.